Hello, it's Friday, September 23rd, 2016 at 1 o'clock Eastern Time, and this is a special edition of Higher Ed Live. I'm your host, Andrea Boyle-Tippett from the University of Delaware.
Hello, it's Friday, September 23rd,
home of the Fightin' Blue Hens. And yes, don't be jealous if your mascot isn't as cool or fierce as ours. Hens are pretty awesome. So on today's live broadcast, we're talking about earned media. The topic is of particular interest to me because I oversee media relations here at Delaware. And as you in the audience know, it can be tough to accurately measure the impact of media coverage. Today's episode should provide some insights and helpful hints to you. Higher Ed Special Edition is part of the Higher Ed Live Network, offering viewers direct access to the best and brightest minds in education. Live broadcasts allow viewers to share knowledge and participate in discussions around the most important issues in the industry. Today's live viewing experience is powered by Maestro, the premier marketing tech platform for broadcasters. All episodes of Higher Ed Live are free and accessible in the video archives at higheredlive.com and in podcast form on iTunes. This episode is made possible by PRSA's Counselors to Higher Education Professional Interest section. The Counselors to Higher Ed section provides PR professionals working in colleges and universities with a few things: high-quality programs, publications, networking, and insights into the best ways to promote the value, power, and appropriate role of communications and marketing functions within institutions of higher ed. Higher Ed Live is produced by M. Stoner, a marketing and communications firm that works with education institutions on branding, strategy, web design, and more. And now, let's move on to the meat of today's program. Joining us today is Katie Russell. Katie is Vice President of Customer Service at IQ Media. Thanks for being here, Katie.
Hi, everyone.
In her role at IQ, Katie is responsible for ensuring client success through the areas of onboarding, technical support, and product development. She also leads the analyst team working with clients to gain deep, actionable insights into the success of their marketing and PR campaigns. Prior to joining IQ in 2013, Katie held several positions in product and client services during a decade spent at Vocus Inc. So earned media can be tricky. You may get a great placement in the LA Times, New York Times, a network morning show, or in your area's most prominent news outlet. But how do you gauge its impact? In 2010, a critical mass of PR professionals set new standards for measurement. Those are called the Barcelona Principles. They said at the time that, quote, ad equivalencies, random use of multipliers, and other silly metrics diminish the integrity of the profession. Among the principles they adopted and have since revised are that measuring the effect on organizational performance can and should be measured where possible, and that social media can and should be measured consistently with other media channels. So we'll discuss both of those today. I, for one, am excited to hear from you, Katie, about some actionable insights. So with that, please take it away.
Media channels. So we'll discuss both.
Great. Thank you for that introduction. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our overall topic today. So welcome. I'm so excited to have the opportunity to share with you today some insights into the work that IQ does, and we have the privilege of doing with our clients, specifically in the higher education customer base. So as a quick background, as Andrea already gave you an introduction to who I am, if you haven't heard of IQ, we are a technology company. We provide our clients with media intelligence solutions, and we do this through a variety of different projects, and they focus essentially on identifying impactful moments and trends and measuring those. So how do you get the most out of the work that you're doing as an earned media professional? So when we had the opportunity to present this webinar today, we were so excited. It is unusual to get the opportunity to speak on how our clients are using our software versus on our software itself. So even more so, the higher education industry is one of, if not the largest segment of our customer base. It also happens to be my personal favorite. It's the one that impresses me the most on a daily basis, and we'll go into some of what we've seen and why throughout today. So let's get started. I'm going to share a presentation with you. All right. So hopefully everybody can view this presentation now. We're going to focus today on how higher education PR professionals are leveraging solutions like IQ Media to provide really concrete ROI, as Andrea mentioned in the introduction, getting past really fuzzy data and getting to really concrete data, and finally get credit for the work that you guys have been doing. Oops. Let's get back to that. Okay, let's start by level setting who the consumer is in higher education. Well, basically everyone. Every generation is a target audience for our higher education clients. Generation Z is about to be your student base. Millennials are your young alumni. Generation X is your emerging market alumni, soon to be parents of incoming students. Boomers are current parents and donors, and the silent generation are your big pocket donors. How many other industries have literally everyone as your potential audience? So now we have challenge 1 for our university clients. Challenge 2 is that each of these generations is interacting with media differently. So your teams not only have to speak to these audiences with a variety of messages, but also through a variety of formats. An important fact, as we're bombarded with alternative entertainment options, people, no matter what generation, are still watching television, whether it's through broadcast, cord cutting, or online methods. 79% of TV viewers are using second screen devices. So why is this so important? Looking at how different generations feel about the types of marketing, of 19 different types of marketing across the categories of advertising, earned, and owned, regardless of the generation, 3 of the top 4 types of marketing most trusted are earned media. The interesting shift generationally is that Generation Z, the incoming college student, values their own opinion more than the opinions of other people. So while millennials are a social generation, they make decisions collectively. Generation Z, while technologically social and digitally native, they pride themselves on the uniqueness of their thoughts and opinions. So this presents an enormous opportunity and challenge for PR and marketing. Generation Z is making up their own minds. They're not taking the opinions of others as the gold standard. They do not trust advertising as much as previous generations. In fact, if you look down this chart, their trust in all 19 forms of marketing across earned, paid, and owned is lower than millennials. Generation Z is making up their own minds based on their own research and experience. So what this means is that PR and marketing have to ensure that they effectively capitalize on every opportunity to bring that Generation Z into their brand fold, really quietly and really carefully, without them knowing. So they want the ideas to be their own, but they're getting their input from somewhere. So that somewhere has got to be your brands over time. So how do you measure something that you're dripping out to a generation of incoming college students over many, many years? There isn't a single moment. It's not a single exposure to a college and then, the child applies or the parent donates. You have to be able to measure all of the different moments along the path. We in the technology industry, until recently, have really equipped you with 3 forms of metrics. Andrea mentioned a few of these in her intro. So we have volume of clips, audience, and media value. More recently, the industry has added some soft metrics you might be familiar with, like article weight based on prominence and impact algorithms or sentiment analysis, all to provide some color context around your impressions. But in general, we're down to 3 main metrics that people measure by. And that about rounds out the toolkit. You can spin those numbers 5 different ways, looking at geographic area or types of media, but really you're stuck with count, audience, and media value. we should really be ashamed. As a technology industry, we should be doing more for you. So why has marketing had the ability to directly track the ROI of campaigns, and why should PR be any different? So this is where attribution, direct attribution, comes into play. The concept of direct attribution for earned media is critical for the higher education space, where buying decisions, whether they're in the realm of donations, student applications, parent support of student applications, athletics-based buying, none of these decisions are impulsive. Okay, they're all immediate. They're all not immediate, and your audience has a very long and windy path of awareness and experience with your brand before the actual purchase is made. These so-called buying cycles could span an entire lifetime. A child is born, their parents are fans of a particular school or alumni of a school, they're brought up with your brand surrounding them. And that leads into a long lifetime of them being your consumer, whether it's through student body, alumni, giving, etc. So attribution allows the PR professional to get credit on the effort in a very realized way. So instead of measuring a single action before the buying decision, in this case, the Facebook post that leads to a buying purchase, and it might be in the in the university space, it might be a Facebook post that led the student finally to click on the application to learn about your application process. So at that point, the marketer, the Facebook, your social marketer, is getting credit for that lead. But that student did not make the decision that day to apply to college, obviously. So how do we measure all of the precursors, all of that brand awareness that has been trickling out there before a certain number of set cycle steps happen before the decision is made? So instead of measuring that single action before the buying cycle, you can now measure the behavior of consumers as they are presented with your messages on earned media. We're no longer limited by our ability to provide only the staples of media value and audience. We're now able to provide you a direct data to filter your activities to into the funnel of the buying decision path. So really treating your earned media right in line with all of the marketing messages that have been measured so specifically for so long. Audience should now be really an informer, a metric to use to understand our placements, not to value them. We should understand the attributes of the target audience we're reaching. So who are we reaching with that interview of the university president, and who is watching the football games against our various competitors? What are they looking at on their phones while they're watching these television events? How is the placement of an interview with one of your professors generating interest in your brand? The reason we can now do this is really because technology has caught up. So your need to do this has not changed over the last 30 or 50 or 100 years, but technology wasn't there to support you. Now it is. Cloud computing and the ability to measure big data changes the landscape for earned media attribution. By syncing any time-based data to media data, we can now show a cause and effect. We can really measure the lift that your particular campaign or specific instance of an interview or crisis, whatever it might be, we can measure the lift that has caused for your brand. Let me give you a very quick consumer-friendly example from outside the higher education space before we launch into some higher ed examples. We work with a music production company. They represent many artists you would know by name, or at least your 10-year-old would. Their PR team struggled with how consumer behavior was affected when an artist appeared on television or had a social media event, and how to judge which television events were more effective, which social tweet fests resulted in more business. All of those things are things that marketers are very used to providing, but earned media really had no way to connect those two pieces. What we're talking about is really consumer behavior connected to the exposure to earned media. So with attribution, this music production company is now able to map their proprietary data from their company, iTunes, Spotify, and Apple Music data for all of their artists to media data, showing on a really simple graph how when they put an artist on Jimmy Fallon, that artist, their tracks, their albums, their overall content, it's increased or decreased in downloads from a baseline when that particular media event occurs. So we're talking about a very simple concept, seems like very simple, very easy, but there is a whole lot of technology behind it, and that technology has just arrived. So really, we are just able to provide you with really strong marketing-like numbers behind your earned media. So now let's take a look at an example that's a little closer to home in the higher education space. In this example, we have a Stanford professor who was featured in a 60 Minutes piece on earthquakes. So clearly a placement for the PR team, a huge win, a success. In our old model, what would come of it? We would be able to report that we had an obscene number of impressions, 10 million on 60 Minutes itself, with another extrapolated lift from online and social discussion of the piece, and an equally meaningless dollar figure for media value presented. Basically, as we flinch, hoping no one asks what it actually means, what that dollar figure means. Your takeaway overall would probably be that one campaign placement or time period, whatever you might be measuring, that you reached a larger audience with this, that this was a good interview. We had more exposure on this than we did with another interview, or it caused this month to be higher than another month. That's great, but it doesn't really tell you what it actually did for your brand. So in comes the next step. Now we have the power to answer those deep questions that we've basically been afraid people were going to ask. Now you can lead with those answers instead of fearing the questions. So this is today, not tomorrow, today. Stanford University can say specifically that this interview resulted in exactly 1,000 visits to their website. We know this because at the time that it was airing, we saw an uptick of 110% of our usual volume in our Google Analytics. Further, we can tell you how behavior differed from market to market. The example here is with website data, but if you were running a campaign to drive calls to your call center or hits to your application page, all of that data, any of that time-sensitive data, time-tracked data, can be matched against any media data. So again, focusing on television here, but the same applies to Twitter, TV, Facebook, online news. Anything with a timeline can now be synced to show direct attribution of the effect of this earned media on your brand. So now you're empowered to move beyond the numbers that represent basically the potential of what you might have affected and actually move toward numbers that represent results.
Hey, Katie, may I pipe in right now?
Sure.
And just remind everyone watching that if they do have questions as we follow along, to use the hashtag HigherEdLive on Twitter so that when you're finished with the presentation, we can answer any of those questions that might be lingering.
That's great. Thanks, Andrea. So also important to note in this, with this example in mind, the audience numbers don't go away. So by no means are we saying that audience measurement is useless. It is far from meaningless. So now audience becomes a tool to inform you of the demographics of your visitors. Who's watching? Where are they watching from? So now you can gain insight into the potential for action from your target audience and connect it to the actual action. As an added bonus, we get to leave the relic of ad equivalency and media value in the trash can where it belongs. Now let's get into some case studies from our clients that we work with. Higher education clients are so unique in their challenges, and I will be a broken record on this today. As communications and PR teams stemming primarily from the size and the diversity of the organizations, you struggle with more challenges than really any other industry I've ever worked with. You struggle with a decentralized PR machine with each school or department operating independently and yet trying to move forward with a consistent brand message. Your community of actors is active, young, diverse, and made up in large part of non-employees. So there goes all of your control. This leads to crisis and news events outside of your control much more frequently for your teams than in most other industries, perhaps with the exception of the airline industry and the professional sports industry. In this case, a great story here for DeVry that went viral. You probably have seen the specific story or one of several in other similar instances. In this one, a single mom brought her toddler to class in her DeVry University class. The toddler understandably got fidgety and resulted in the professor holding the child for the duration of the class. So we have a nice picture there of a professor holding a child. How sticky is that on social media? Okay, not only did the mom share to a local television and social media result in a huge outpouring of support for the mom, the appreciation for the school and the professor, it hit heartstrings with the exact target audience of working adults that DeVry University is trying to attract. So it was a total home run for them with very little interaction from their team. In addition to the social impact, this is a very clear Facebook type post that comes along your Facebook wall, and you see it has gotten 7,000 shares over the last 20 minutes. Very, very common today from the type of the story, right? It pulls at your heartstrings, single mom, trying to get an education, etc. Not only was it perfect for social media, but the news shows, the morning news shows, the visuals in it resulted in a lift for DeVry University's TV coverage that maintained for the entire rest of the year. That day, which was actually today, and exactly today a year ago, that day was the highest day of television, resulting in the highest month of television coverage for the entire year for DeVry. And this accessibility of education is such an issue for DeVry University students that it attacked it again surrounding the Olympics with a multifaceted campaign as an Olympic partner. The university provided scholarships to Olympic athletes who have limited funds and time due to their intense training regimen. You have athletes who will compete at the highest levels and forego wage or college education for several years to do this. So the campaign involved paid advertising with a specific Olympic-focused ad, but also coverage through earned media interviews of athletes during the games. DeVry was able to hone in on the earned content that mattered to the DeVry team and gain insight into the success of both visual placements of the DeVry images. Imagine this Olympic athlete just competed and they are making the finals and they're being interviewed in one of those on the beach in Rio interviews, and they're wearing a DeVry University polo shirt. Okay, so DeVry's image is there. They're talking about this great partnership they have with DeVry in order to further their education while they're still competing. So those on-screen interviews were able to be captured, as well as through traditional pickups, as well as image pickups. So this is a great example of where Google Analytics can then come in and provide insight where, when incorporated with the media data, to evaluate the results of a campaign. Since both of these campaigns are all about the students served by DeVry and speak directly to the audience that they are hoping to attract as future students. Not only is the ROI important for any campaign, but here's also a great example of where the other half of measurement that we were talking about, which provides insight and baseline comparisons for campaigns, can give great insights. For DeVry, as with most universities, your campuses are in specific markets, and like all universities, they target specific demographics. Aside from just assigning ROI to a campaign, it's also important to understand the audience you reached and why you reached that audience. So this can inform future campaigns and your actions getting content placed online, virally, or in TV. Here's where measuring the cumulative brand awareness and consumer behavior would benefit the DeVry team. Two excellent stories, one from a chance occurrence, one from a planned campaign. Both clearly communicate to DeVry's prospective population of students the supportive community they would be joining. And you can imagine the lift that would be measured through the website visits or application downloads as these stories ran on television in specific markets. So all of the unique qualities of a university ecosystem as it pertains to PR, remember our previous list of community size, decentralized PR, youth of community, and everything else, all of these qualities put your teams in the unfortunate position of responding to crisis situations more frequently than in the average brand. So whether it's a PR crisis where something has been said or done that causes an intense and immediate reaction to your brand, or whether it's a crisis involving campus safety, your teams are confronted with more of these potential issues each day than most companies see in an entire year. Our higher education clients truly amaze me with the balancing act they perform each day, both reacting to the actions they can't control right alongside the work you're doing every day on planned campaigns. You are truly jugglers like no other group I've ever worked with. Let's look at an unfortunate example of the type of ways our clients use platforms like ours and others to assess the media landscape. One of the biggest business issues our higher ed clients have is the traditional monitoring problem of cutting through the noise. So this is something that companies like IQ have been talking about for a long time. How do you get through the millions of tweets, thousands of articles, hundreds of thousands of television mentions? How do you get through those to find the university traditional monitoring that you care about? And boy, is there a lot of noise in university space. You struggle with bucketing athletic news, traffic reports, alumni news, people getting married, you name it, universities are mentioned in it. How do you monitor a crisis situation within all of that? So with all of that streaming in, how do you isolate? Well, UCLA underwent just such a crisis on June 1st this year when a student shot a professor on campus. So this awful tragedy is something that many of our university clients use news aggregation systems to monitor and prepare for. With the Twitter sphere as its first alert of this type of event, teams are able to monitor and react as well as adjust protocols for the PR team based on the feedback. So not only can you monitor the active situation, but having a tool in place where you can go back and look at the trend will then help you for future situations. And a lot of those crisis situations are always, hopefully, always going to be first times for you. And the key is to make sure that whatever response you had, that you learn from it, so that next time, even if your response was as perfect as it possibly could be, what can you do better in that crisis? In the UCLA case, as in most crisis situations these days, social media was the first to react. A great tip from our university clients that I wanted to pass along to you that people don't generally realize is you can monitor Twitter through a sampling of the full Twitter feed, making it trend monitoring accessible even on a very limited budget. So we recommend this to our university clients frequently because you need more than an influencer base of content. You cannot just look at the people who are journalists, online influencers, the people with high following. You can't just look at those. You have to look at your consumers when you're looking at crisis monitoring. Okay, you need to understand the peaks and valleys, but we've yet to find a client, most especially in the university space, who needs to monitor 100% of every person everywhere mentioning their school. So not the case necessarily for a specific campaign you're trying to measure. That's where that full feed comes in handy, because you really want to see every mention of a particular campaign, perhaps. But overall monitoring of social trends related to anything, including a crisis, which may have a very high volume of content, you can use a sampling and keep your content costs down. So you can see this worked exceptionally well here for UCLA, who could see the Twitter conversation from students involved in the crisis spike in real time. The incident happened at 10 a.m. If they had only been monitoring online, they wouldn't have seen any data until after the lockdown was mentioned at noon. So you can see, that traditional media cycle, it takes a little while to get out, to get across the wires, et cetera. So in a crisis situation, you have to have that quick reaction. And even if they weren't prepared for it, which they were, they locked down the school. There was, as excellent a response to that in the middle of LA. There is really no worse sort of horror than having to lock down a campus like UCLA. So they're, as good as their reaction was, they can look at this and say, okay, so not only how do we react in that instant, the chart that you're looking at on your screen right now, if you notice, is only at 2 days of content. But let's imagine we look at this, how did the media react quickly within the hour? How did the media react on the long tail? Okay, what was the conversation? Where did it happen? Which media types influenced other media types? And how did it trend from there? And how are we involved? So those are all questions that you can answer because the technology is there to show you everything in one place, to show you the interaction. That's all available to you now. athletics. So another area that makes measurement a monumental task for higher education clients. I'm sure it elicits some groans from our audience today. Those groans most likely come from the vast cluttering of your institutional news monitoring that your athletics coverage causes. I can't tell you how many of our clients we spend endless hours working on how to separate the content that they want to see on a day-to-day for institutional monitoring versus their athletics content. So I'm going to step it up one more because there's a whole element of insight that your athletics departments would love to have. And not just the athletics. If you're an institution without a substantial athletics department, you have partners on campaigns, sponsors for programs. And until recently, technology has really not provided you with a full picture demonstrating the ROI that your sponsors are getting. The old way, there's an initial announcement of the sponsorship. For example, Nike or Under Armour, they sign a multi-year, multi-million-dollar contract with the University of Michigan or Notre Dame or another high-profile athletic program. This causes a news cycle for those largest contracts. It will cause a news cycle. And likely that is the end of your earned coverage measurement. So likely there isn't a lot of other news unless there's some kind of contract issue or an athlete issue. Generally, your earned coverage measurement for your sponsor sort of ends after the initial announcement. It's all around the financial deal. The marketing sponsorship team will perhaps be presented with a report on the effects of those sponsorships, including the value of the on-air images in the form of logos on uniforms and stadium boards or step and repeats. But these reports are generally on a quarter lag and are based on extrapolations. Our university and professional sports teams and sponsorship departments are now empowered with real numbers in real time. You can, through logo recognition technology for any partnership or sponsorship, again, think outside of athletics if athletics doesn't pertain to you, but any kind of sponsorship or partnership, you can now monitor the on-air images that may never have words spoken, but they have an impact. That kid watching, their favorite Stanford football game will wear Nike because their favorite Stanford athlete has a Nike headband on. Okay. That impact brings us full circle to our attribution model. Providing the earned value through the audience insight combined with a direct attribution model gives a picture that has rarely been attainable until recently. So further, sure, Nike and Under Armour fight to pay millions of dollars for the top program contracts. But what about the smaller schools that are trying to establish a higher value for their sponsorship? What if they could show their sponsors how long their brand would be exposed on screen and the profile of the audience who would be exposed to it? The PR industry, with the help of technologists, has always relied on data to confirm and prove ideas that we already knew. Here's real data that now tells us something we couldn't measure before. It's actually data making us smarter. Specifically, with logo placements in earned content, our clients are focused on elements including the time in seconds that an image appeared on screen in total over a period of time, let's say, which networks and programs are using the brand logos or are showing images of their athletes with those brand logos, which markets are being exposed to those visuals, and the demographics behind the types of people that are watching the programming. And you can see in these charts on your screen right now, there is a direct correlation when you look at the Google Analytics of your visitors to your site and you look at your audience. When you pull those together, you can show that direct attribution very simply. It doesn't have to be a very, very complex end result. It's the simpler results, the simpler messages are going to resonate much more as you present them. All right, to our final example. Our higher education clients are not only the most complex clients internally that we work with, but with nearly 5,000 traditional colleges and university, and even more if you include all of the alternative ways to pursue higher education, you have more direct competitors than most industries. I actually can't think of an industry that deals with as many direct competitors for students, professors, dollars than you do. Our clients generally have a core set of 5 to 10 other institutions that they compare themselves against. But keep in mind that this could expand based on issue or topic to a set of 50 or more in their field of vision. The current advances in cloud computing benefit your situation now because data is big, storage is designed for it, and we as an industry are able to provide deep archives and lightning fast access to that data. So particularly, we see our clients in higher education strive to be seen as thought leaders, either in specific areas or in many areas across the university. Each team may have its own goal for thought leadership, and measuring the impact of the sometimes disparate work across many departments of a university can really be overwhelming. So technology is finally backing you up and helping you with that, finally becoming agile enough to provide platforms that can unite your teams across campus to be looking at varied data sets using a single methodology. And that's really key. You don't have to take on the measurement for your entire organization. Some of you have literally 30 teams that do PR independently and may roll up to a corporate PR body. But it's not that you have to take that on, but systemizing the methodology across your university will give you such benefit. You will be able to present the same numbers, the same metrics, looking at the same body of work, and really be able to provide insight into what's working and what's not. Again, getting back to that actionable data. So with extreme competition to attract students and faculty, being able to measure a thought leadership message through all forms of media and provide insight into their effect on each type of media's impact on the other proves invaluable when PR is fighting for a seat at the table with marketers who have all this really specific data, and we've been forced to rely on such fuzzy data up until now. The real numbers and insight we have been talking about today will change the conversation. A great tip I've learned from several of our university clients that I'll share with you is that on regular reporting, say monthly or quarterly reports, providing a few high-level numbers of overall content is great. Total numbers of clips, total numbers of mentions by professor or by dean. But identifying the universe of target publications based on the outlet's viewership or reader demographics and measuring your exposure versus your competitors' penetration through the weight or prominence of your coverage within that defined world of publications gives a much more actionable and targeted insight. Even further, some of our most effective clients have success by defining that publication list by your goals. So if you have internal goals for your team, for example, what runs through my head with this, you may have a goal for an HR-focused goal to improve the university's brand reputation within potential faculty base, or to increase brand recognition amongst potential students, right? So you have these very high-level general goals, and good goals you can measure to, right? So each of these goals has a demographic and a target audience, and they're different. And your messaging and all of your output is different depending on your audience. So why isn't your measurement different depending on that audience? So each of those goals, with knowing that target audience as you do, match your target publications to that demographic group. And that will give you a baseline for comparisons over time or amongst your competitive set. So if your target audience is potential faculty and you want to measure, within your engineering department, take a list of publications, whether they're consumer publications that your faculty in that area read. Okay, so you've got engineering professors; they're going to read really high-level analytical publications and some trade publications. That's your world for that goal, not the entire world of every online outlet or television station, right? You leave that for that very high-level brand analysis, and that's fine. That's a good insight to have. But then dig deeper. Go into how you're doing for your target audience. Remember, it doesn't have to be a monumental task. Some of our clients have fewer than 5 publications assigned to a particular goal. Some have 200. It's not the number that matters. Whatever number works for you works, but the consistency. So creating baselines are simply by defining the scope of measurement and measuring the same thing time over time over time, or competitors over competitors. I hope that the primary message you leave with today is that we as an industry are finally doing better for you. I have been in the PR industry since I graduated from college and obtained the grunt job of actually cutting out articles, pasting them onto a piece of paper, and I'm really going to date myself. We actually looked up the publication circulation in a Bacon's book, typed out a label, and made photocopies of these books for executives on a weekly basis. So a week later, the people would know what was in the news after we got done cutting. Technology stepped in and automated most of that process. But what we haven't thought about is the numbers that we based our measurements on really haven't changed in 30 years. There was a total circulation, multipliers, and resulting ad value we could barely explain. That's been our system for decades. It is now safe to move past that. We as a technology industry can provide you with better insight into your data than just audience, better ROI measurement than ad value. We have audience demographics and direct attribution. The two together bring the PR industry really up to the level of that marketers have been competing on for years. And you can now get credit to prove that you deserve a seat at that table based on the work that you're doing, not based on potential. All right, so questions. I'm going to exit out of this so that we can see the chat board.
So Katie, I have a question.
Sure.
I really liked what you said about trying to find, in a crisis especially, a sampling of Twitter users. So can you describe a bit more about what that sampling looks like? You know, who is in that sampling? And then also, if individuals don't necessarily have your platform, what other free or low-cost platforms could they use to gauge that?
Sure. So sampling is great because a lot of platforms use this influencer model, right? And when you're trying to measure the consumer, influencers are not the consumer. Influencers are the most important people by whatever definition has been defined as an influencer. So when you're trying to measure consumer, you cannot use an influencer model. You have to be able to see what I say on Twitter, you know, what this other person says on Twitter, what the influencer says on Twitter, but also what the people that, you know, don't necessarily influence anything say. So the way that they do sampling is it's essentially a percentage of the fire hose, and you can sample any percentage of that. You know, the more you sample, the greater the cost content-wise. So, but what we've seen measurement-wise is that you really only need close to a 10 to 15% sample to see the same spikes and the slopes of the lines as you would if you had 100%. And we actually tested this on the campaign news with Hillary and Donald Trump, and you know, ratcheting different levels of sampling for it. And really you get down to, you really only need to see 10 to 15% of that content, and the rest of it is just money out the door. So that's really what we recommend for the consumer tracking. Again, like I said earlier, when you're tracking a campaign, the measuring the entire audience that campaign reached can be a valuable thing. And that's where having access to the fire hose is a valuable piece. As far as free services, the Twitter content is generally, you know, for most brands, not an expensive piece if you're not trying to do the full fire hose. So Twitter content is really cheap content. Again, as long as you're not trying to measure every mention of Hillary Clinton. So free-wise, you know, there are tools that you can track your own mentions in. That's pretty much where the free tools become limited. You don't really have free tools that can track everything and give you insight into everything. But with a sampling, you should be able to get a very affordable tool.
Great. So another question is, what about shareability of news stories? So what I'm talking about is, a news story appears in the local paper and then is shared throughout social media. Is there any good way to track that and follow where that story goes and then, kind of potentially lead it back to your organization?
Sure. So a great way to do that is basically turning those earned media, you're almost turning them into owned placements. So by tracking with Google Analytics especially, you can get very detailed beyond just the numbers of clicks and things like that. You can get into search results, what people are searching for when they see specific content. So as you see an article come out and it gets shared across Facebook, et cetera, how is that impacting the Google, what people are searching for on Google and how they're getting to your website, your web data from Google Analytics or other platforms. When I say Google Analytics, there's Adobe Omniture and other platforms that measure, but they track all of those things. So measuring your earned placements against that real data of how people are getting to you, they can see all of that. And that's important from a PR. In the past, it's all been limited to the marketing team that is looking at that. And that's where, PR really needs to step up and say, we need to own this data as well.
So you were talking before about the standards for the impact of the media hit. So for instance, with the Stanford example, you did hits to the website. Are there any specific benchmarks that people could use kind of as a baseline for what might be a useful hit? I mean, I know it's very circumstantial, but I'm just looking for something to give people a kind of starting off point. So
you're asking for standards as far as types of data to cross against it? Sorry, I'm not sure.
Yes. So in an instance like the 60 minutes, you said it's 1,000 hits to the website. Is that a high, low, in between number? And
oh, sure. So it's really going to matter on your own statistics, but that's, again, baselining for measurement is everything, right? So knowing where you normally are at that time of day, day of week, the day part, knowing where you normally are on the on your website hits, or whatever metric you're looking at. You have to know where you normally are in order to measure what lift you've gotten from whichever campaign it is. And if you don't know where you normally are, then you need to just use it. It's easy, right? You use a tool that has an archive. You can go in and you can measure that. You can measure it in Google Analytics. Go back, look at, or in your call center volume, go back. All of that, everybody has data now. And that's the great thing for PR, is that data is now just a commodity. So everybody has it, it's sitting somewhere. It's just a matter of finding which data would mean the most to your specific instance.
Fantastic. Well, I don't have any questions coming in from Twitter at the moment, but I'm sure that people might have them following, and they can find your information, your contact information on the Higher Ed Live website to send those directly to you.
Absolutely.
Great. So with that, I just want to thank you, our guest, Katie Russell from IQ Media. I really appreciate you spending the time and walking us all through all these kind of complicated metrics, but once you break them down, I think that they'll have a lot of value for the people who are viewing in our audience today. And as always, thanks to our program sponsor, PRSA's Counselors to Higher Education, and as well as to our sponsor, M. Stoner. We appreciated you joining us for this special edition of Higher Ed Live. Have a great day.